Babin. Ms. Bankston.
Here.
Ms. Barnes.
Here.
Mr. Bourgeois. Representative Gloria. Mr. Chasson.
Here.
Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cox. Mr. Cressom. Ms. Dandridge.
Here.
Mr. Davis.
Here.
Ms. Dubin.
Here.
Ms. Dewey.
Here.
Mr. Duffy.
Here.
Mr. Dupree. Ms. Ferry. Senator Fessy. Representative Gabriello.
Here.
Mr. Gray. Senator Henskins. Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Landry.
Here.
Mr. Macaluso.
Here.
Mr. Mallory. Mr. Matthews. Senator McMath. Dr. Malonson. Ms. Methvin. Mr. O'Neill.
Here.
Representative Pierre. Ms. Trail.
Here.
Ms. Trish.
Okay, now the next item is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
All in favor? All right, thank you for the agenda. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes, which you received in advance. Any comments or motion to approve the minutes? Motion, I received, ready, second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Next item is the commission organization and business. At our last committee meeting, we had a very robust discussion about how we can move forward, and one of the ideas that emerged from that was the establishment of subcommittees, and I'll turn that over to Paul right now.
Okay, thank you. Before we get to the subcommittees, I did want to just kind of advertise to the public and the members again one more time. We did set on some dates for the rest of the meetings for the year. So we're in the summertime, July 26th. We'd love to be in Southwest Louisiana. Again, this is kind of same time, 10 to 12. We don't have any other details kind of worked out yet, so we have a couple months to plan it. But particularly maybe you could help us kind of think about where we could meet that could hold this number of people, and if there are some particular projects you want to highlight or some efforts that are going on, we would love to kind of put a spotlight on that and really experience the region while we're here. So that'd be great, and that goes for anybody else too who's doing work in the Southwest. And then in later in the fall, October, I guess it'll be really the heart of election season, and we want to really focus on October and how does this group really help influence the agenda for the next administration. Whoever that governor is, whatever the issue, we want this issue to be on the table for that administration, and this group is a great, again, place to kind of develop that. So we want that to be the focus there. We don't have a location for that meeting yet, but we'll figure that out and let you know ahead of time, but do hold the date for now. So that's that for the meeting dates. And then, so back to the committees, I do think that we wanted to, as Karen said, this is a response to what the group discussed last time. Also really a way that we can make sure that the advisory function is really being activated by letting you guys dive in deeper on some issues. So these committees will be, again, there'll be public meetings just like these larger meetings. But we want them to kind of fit within the larger context of what CPRA already has stood up. So we're not trying to be duplicative. We want to fill in gaps where there are some. So CPRA already has 2 standing subcommittees, the Coastal Levee Consortium, so that's made up of all the coastal levee districts. They have a really specific purpose. They create an annual report, and so I think all the flood protection issues really should be kind of worked through that committee. And then they also have a National Flood Insurance and Coastal Insurability Committee which obviously is a huge topic. I know that comes up everywhere we go about people wanting to talk about that. I think the CPRA subcommittee is the place to kind of really focus attention there. And so I proposed some names and some categories, and I'm happy to take edits from the group, but just for ways that we can kind of supplement based on the conversation last meeting, and just kind of some known issues that do come up. So law, policy, and funding is one. Natural resources and ecosystems would be a second, and then resilient communities, economies, and cultures is the third. And so I'm going to just spend a second with what issues might reasonably fall under these. You can, it clearly is not an exhaustive list. And then I'd love to take volunteers. If you feel like this looks like me, we can kind of put your name on that now, and then we can kind of figure out an organizer who's going to help kind of work with GOTA staff to convene this group and kind of move forward. So the first one is law, policy, and funding. We heard loud and clear that that's a tried and true role for this commission. I think it's just some example issues that we know about that we're going to touch on today. So I think today's agenda is another good example of how we can talk broadly about things, but then all the follow-up is going to want to happen in some kind of word for word style. So we're going to touch on a lot of issues that will show up on these committee lists. So one, future funding opportunities, whether that's specific things that are on the table today in Washington, or things that aren't being discussed yet. The core got brought up a lot last meeting. So core issues, whether it's WRDA or beneficial use or crediting, that's going to happen through this committee. Legislative needs, we're going to be talking about this session in this meeting. And then just any other policy issues, I think, would fall in this group. So I would love to see if anybody just feels like this is definitely me. I'd love to just take names now and kind of put them on the list. And thank you, Mark. Is that a question or a first volunteer?
I'd like to volunteer everybody.
Well,
I think I can do that.
okay, thank you. Does anybody else kind of feel like connecting? Thanks. Simone, Sean, and Cynthia. Wow, thank you.
And don't feel limited to one committee.
Well, I think that's really healthy and really great start. And so I hope everybody also too saw this kind of come through, so you've kind of seen what thought about which one you might want to be on. Do I have one of these several people just going to be volunteer, not to be the chair forever and ever, but to be the one that kind of organizes and coordinates with me and Olivia and Ingrid about kind of calling this group together? Is there one of y'all that would just kind of say, I'll be the point of contact? Thank you, Cynthia. So Cynthia and I will work on this meeting, this group, and let's go to the next one. So the next one is natural resources and ecosystems. This is the one that Dr. Melanson really wanted to put on the table, and I think that it makes a lot of sense. So my thought on this committee, it could handle specific resource-related issues like offline moisture culture and things that I think were on Dr. Melanson's mind. It could also kind of be that resource conflict resolution branch for this commission. That's one of our main roles. So if it's whether it's related to CPRA projects or other projects happening on the coast like offshore wind or carbon capture on public lands, I know there are a lot of big topics that are happening in that space. I do think this could be a place where natural carbon sequestration conversations happen. We're going to talk about that towards the end of this meeting about some efforts going on there, or kind of sediment diversions, are permitted and headed to construction this summer. This could be a group where we're talking about adaptive management, operations, or kind of the rollout of the mitigation plan. Again, these are just some ideas, issues that I thought might fit under this bucket. Do we have any volunteers that feel like this is kind of where they want to be active?
I volunteer Earl.
You volunteer, Earl, I like that. So we'll put Dr. Lawson on there. Thank you, Christy Trejo. I saw her name. Katie Armator, Chris Macaluso. Anybody else feel like this is them? Sean Duffy. Thank you, Sean. Okay. Thank you very much. That was great. And I'm going to reach out to Dr. Melancon and see if he'll be the point of contact, because he was kind of the most vocal person last week. So thanks. And then third, but not least, I've got a lot of adjectives on here, but resilient communities, economies, and cultures. there's a whole section of the new master plan, the 2023 master plan, called Beyond the Master Plan, and I think that's kind of what I was kind of thinking when I have this big bucket here. So I do think this some issues that jump to my mind that I know that we're working through at the state would be just how we can talk about equitable outcomes and justice for initiatives. I think this is the committee that could figure out interactions with the climate plan, energy transition issues. These are coastal issues, and they're also broader than coastal issues. So how do we kind of work through that here? The kind of the resilience work that I'll talk about in a few minutes too, across state agencies, but also to local communities or parish governments. Receiving communities, you know, what is the state's role or thoughts on that? Cultural preservation. So a lot of these human dimensions kinds of issues, but also the word economies is in there too. So I know that's a piece of resilience that didn't really have a specific home in another lane. So do we have any volunteers for this group? Jeanette, thank you. Robin, Jessica, Arthur, okay, Jeanette, Robin, Jessica, Arthur, Simone, thank you. And
I'm going to actually try to go to all of the committees.
oh, that's great, thank you, Karen. Great, and Meg, too, for that, thank you. Do we have a volunteer to be, again, just a point of contact? I'm not going to put all the responsibility on you, but just to kind of be our organizer. Jeanette, Arthur, thank you. Awesome, I was going to call on somebody else, but if you saved them, thank you very much, Arthur. Yes, Robin.
Is it possible to add fisheries explicitly to this list?
I think that's great. So do you think it fits better here than on the natural resources kind of side?
From the economic business side, or it probably does in both places, but I was
Okay, and I think it's totally fair to have an issue pop up on multiple ones of these. And so I will put that fisheries. Okay. Yes, Jack.
Can you reference the low policy of funding as well?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Chip. Any other edits to these topics or these names people want to be on? Or questions? Yeah, please.
Is the subcommittee limited to the members of this committee, or is it possible to add non-committee members to it?
Yes, so I think that's a great question. So by the statute, the commission could add non-commission members to these subcommittees. I think for today, we wanted to at least publicly name kind of who's going to be on these from us. We can, I think once the committee gets together or figures out what issue they actually want to talk about first or whenever, they can kind of are free to flesh out the representatives. So if you're going to spend the whole time talking about the core and the law policy group, I think you should include the core. So however that needs to work out, it can be the natural one. Anybody else have a question or an edit? Yes, Cindy?
On law policy funding, I think we should have in some way the development of resilience office or resilience issues because they're in development.
Great. I think that's a good example of how this group might take on the structure or the governance or the legislative vehicles for it, and then another group might talk about like what should they be doing and how do they do that a little better or make recommendations kind of to the substance.
One more question.
Yeah.
I know that you have CPRA's insurance and insurability, but if anybody has ideas about where that overlap might be best housed, at least we could draw from that group to find a home base here, because obviously that's going to be an enormous issue in the coming next few years.
Thank you. I think to Jeanette's point, I think the CPRA subcommittee works similar too. I would hope that anybody that wanted to really take a bite out of that would show for those and kind of engage there too. Yes, Jessica. Okay, thank you. All right.
Charles,
Yes.
just based upon Cynthia's comment, so if you go back just a few slides to talk about the subcommittees underneath the CPRA board, obviously there's a coastal levy consortium that stood up in statute. National Flood Insurance and Coastal Insurability is done via resolution through the CPRA board. But to Cynthia's point, I think that there needs to be a lot of interaction between the advisory commission subcommittees and the subcommittees of the CPRA board, especially subcommittee B there, the National Flood Insurance Insurability, because as Cynthia just noted, that is going to be an issue that is going to be a huge focus of this state over the next several years. And I don't want to insinuate that I'm calling it an ancillary issue, but it's always just kind of been on the fringes of the coastal discussion in years past. And as a result of risk rating 2.0, some of the issues that we're having with NFIP, I think the members of this commission need to pay very close attention to some action that the state is going to be taking on this front. And so there's been several interactions with members of Congress on this. There have been meetings with the Biden administration. There's been phone conversations with the governor, with the FEMA administrator, with the Secretary of Homeland Security. It just seems like the needle is not moving at the national level on this. And so the state is going to be taking action on this front in the coming months. And I think that for the members with the broad representation on this commission, interacting with the subcommittee on the CPRA board on this issue is going to be very helpful.
Anybody else?
One more quick question. Is the coastal financing corp still active?
It's not there's a financing corporation. It's not technically active, but it is still exists in statute and could be pulled together as needed. I think it's our approach there. And again, that group. So I could just say that group was really specifically stood up to investigate the bonding out of Mesa revenues over the years. Thanks to Representative Garofalo, it added on the power to also investigate the bonding of some of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill funding. So that's kind of, they have a very kind of specific role there. And so sometimes people have tried to make it, or people including me and Jim at times, say, hey, can you guys help us think through like all the money and all the things? And they're like, well, we really want to keep a narrow focus on the bonding question. So that's where I do think there's a difference between the financing corporation and kind of this funding general topic that I'm going to get into in the next presentation, and something that's something we can take on. But it's still there, and it's still ready to act if we have a bond issue that we want to bring. Okay, well, that's all we have for that. I appreciate everybody that volunteered for a committee, and I think this is going to be a real fruitful way for this commission to be active in the next. So.
All right, our next item is the long policy updates from Charles, the 3 components. So go ahead.
Okay, so like I said, I've got 3 big updates, 3 kind of big policy updates. Some meetings might be more project update heavy, other meetings might be policy heavy. We wanted to kind of introduce these topics. These are big, important topics that the state's been considering. They might just be there kind of like primers, and it might be just kind of fuel to kind of go back into the subcommittees. But we wanted to engage this group now, and you have start to get your thoughts as a whole committee, as a whole group, as well as kind of dive in deep. So the first one, this one is going to be kind of about really, these are all big topics and big important issues. So this one is on kind of the long-term financial outlook for the coastal program. Brent and I did this presentation together recently in this last year our board, and this group is, again, really ideally situated to kind of take us on, because this is one of the biggest issues that we're going to be talking about over the next several years. So we start with this map just as a reminder that the coastal problem is bigger than the amount of available sediment that we have. It's bigger than the amount of money that we are going to be able to put our hands on to work on this. The 2007, so the first coastal master plan, although it was largely a conceptual plan, if you did put a dollar amount on all those projects that were in the plan, it was probably a $200 to $300 billion worth of work in that plan. And unfortunately, that's not an amount of money that the state feels like it can expect to get at one time to kind of push towards this issue. So beginning in 2012 master plan, the state started to try to narrow down, started to ask 2 important questions. What is the amount of money that we can reasonably expect to be able to put towards this issue? Be ambitious, but also be realistic. And that's kind of what created that $50 billion planning constraint that's in the master plan even to this day. And the other big question, right, is so we know we're limited in the amount of money we have, and the amount of sediment we have. How do you make the best choices in terms of where the dollars we do have gets spent? And so that's the whole prioritization effort that is really baked into the master plan. And that's what kind of created this $1 billion a year kind of level of ambition or pace of progress that we wanted to make. So if we're trying to spend a $50 billion plan over a 50-year planning horizon, that's the level of effort that we're trying to see year in, year out. So what this map shows us, though, is that even being totally successful, so this is from the draft 23 Coastal Master Plan, future with action. So this is assuming the full $50 billion is spent. We're still going to have a very different coast. So we're still going to have a coast that needs to be managed. There's going to be a coast that has residual risk. There's going to be a coast with different changes happening in the ecosystem. So we are not trying to build a plan and then walk away. I think that's really important to appreciate. And then even if we do secure the $50 billion, there's still going to be more work to do no matter what we do. So I think that's important, like, context to understand how we're walking into this question of kind of the long-term funding for the coastal program. The good news is that we are absolutely where we want to be. The last couple annual plans have been at that $1 billion mark or above. This year's annual plan that Brett's going to talk about in a minute is a $1.7 billion plan, so that's amazing. So this is where we want to be, and this is not only good for putting projects on the ground and delivering direct benefits to communities and the coast, but it's also a job creator for the state of Louisiana. 10,000 plus jobs are created based on this amount of spending from CPRA. But this scale of the program depends on revenue streams that can be dedicated to projects. So we have to have enough money and enough view of where the money's coming from and when to be able to build out a program that can deliver to this level. So I'm going to walk through some of our biggest funding streams so everybody has an appreciation for what they are today, kind of what the size of them is, who's kind of in charge of them, what they can and can't be used for, and kind of what their timing or certainty is, so that we can kind of start understanding what the 10 years or what 10 years from now might need to look like this coastal program. So on your slides and on this presentation, I've got some symbols there. So I've got a little state seal. If it's state dollars, I've got a not state dollars seal. Sometimes it's federal, sometimes it's BP money, sometimes it's just not state dollars. Then I've got a little structural icon for funding streams that can be used for risk reduction, and then a little marsh creation for all the funding streams that can be used for ecosystem restoration. So you'll see as we go through this, some things are very much dedicated to one or the other. Some are flexible, some are all that kind of stuff. So that's what those little icons mean. And so I'm going to try to quickly do this so we can talk about the future outlook. So the first one I want to talk about is the state mineral revenue. This is it can be up to $30 million at times, but in the recent past it's been more like 12 or 15 $1 million. This is flexible state money that comes to us every year. It goes to the CPRA Trust Fund. So this is something that it comes directly to CPRA through that. It's, like I said, it's annual, but it's variable. We never know kind of exactly how much it's going to be. It's never going to be more than around $30 million. And this is what the state uses for matching the equipment program, for programmatic expenditures like master plan development and data management. It's this cash flow for grant programs. So if we have to pay for a project and then seek a reimbursement later, this is the cash that kind of is used for that. And it's also for operational expenses. So these are flexible dollars. This can be used for restoration or protection. And these are true state dollars. The next one is, I'm going to do the two state funding sources first, is surplus money. So the legislature has allocated surplus money to the coastal program. It's one of the 6 eligible uses, but it's very variable. We never know when there's going to be a surplus realized or how much or it's going to be actually dedicated to CPRA. So these are also used specifically to build projects, so we can use these dollars for programmatic type things. I think it's correct. I'm looking at Greg. So this is 4 projects. They could be protection or restoration, but it's really up to the legislature and the governor's office. It's their political decision on how much money and when. And so the timing and the certainty is unknown. It kind of depends on the funds available and what the legislature decides to do. So we've had Revenues, these revenues are always welcome, but they're never something that we can kind of really count on. And they're very significant at times too. So they're kind of all over the place in terms of the magnitude, but that's what I wanted to kind of lay out now. The next one is really an important one. We just got this a few days ago that the state, the Federal Department of the Interior has dispersed $353 million to the 4 gold producing states. CPRA's share of that's going to be $124.9 million this year. If you add the money that goes directly to the parishes, it's $156 million for the state as a whole. And this money comes from the Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, which is really about qualified revenues coming from oil and gas production in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, I was trying to get your attention on the previous slide on surplus. So this year, in consultation with legislators, parish presidents, the governor, he has allocated $157 million to CPRA in surplus revenues, which is great, yes. However, that has to be approved by the Louisiana legislature. And so you're going to see those expenditures outlined in House Bill 2, likely in a supplemental expenditure bill, however they move it through the legislative process. And in years past, the legislature has taken issue with the amount of money allocated to CPRA because they look at a $1.76 billion annual plan and think, well, why does CPRA need an additional $157 million? And so every project that is included on our surplus list is a project that is going to address an area that was damaged during Laura, Delta, Ida, Zeta. Go through the Greek alphabet there if you want to. It covers cost overruns because inflation is also impacting coastal restoration and hurricane protection projects. So we're seeing projects that are about to go to bid or have been publicly bid that are exceeding the amount that was previously allocated to them. And as a result of IIJA, there are cost shares associated with many of these federal allocations. Southwest Coastal, Organza, Chapalaya. And so these surplus revenues allow us to leverage those federal dollars through IIJA and other federal legislative vehicles. And so we need members of this commission engaged during legislative session to help us get all of the $157 million. And so, again, in years past, I remember last year in the House when we were discussing this, we had some legislative leadership say you're not getting $120 million. When the bill left the House, we got more than $120 million, but it was on other priorities. And so Coastal Day is coming up. I don't know if we're going to be mentioning that, Charles, but you will be provided with a list of all of the projects that we're funding through with surplus, and we would just ask that you help us engage the Louisiana legislature on state surplus, because it's a great opportunity for the next fiscal year, of course.
Awesome. Thanks, Chip. Sorry.
Can I ask a real quick question? When is Coastal Day, and do we have the bill number for the surplus yet?
Not for surplus. Coastal Day is April the 24th, yes, which is a Monday. So, there's a typical run show where the governor will speak, various members of the legislature, Representative Garofalo always comes. There will be an industry day, I believe, that we're hosting at CPRA for industry representatives to not only engage with CPRA leadership, but to engage with other business and industry representatives that operate in this space. And that will be held over at the Center for Rouge Studies right here across the street. And then, of course, Coast Builders always does a little crawfish bowl at the end of the day. So April 24th, you should be getting an email from Russell or Scott Kirkpatrick in the coming days.
Meg, we have a final planning call tomorrow, and then we'll make sure that everything goes, we can send it through the commission to make sure, and please share it beyond that too.
But on the bill number, Meg, I believe that, if I remember correctly, HB2 has got to be heard by House Ways and Means. And then there's a supplemental funding bill that is attached. So it's not Too big a
It's
term.
too, yeah.
Is that right? Yeah, Mark?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the need for cost sharing on projects. Obviously, we're making another swing at some federal funding. But most federal funding is going to come with the requirement of a non-federal cost sharing. And if you don't have the cost share lined up, you can budget the station, generally speaking. And that's quite honestly, this is the real reason we were able to get WIPRA, is the state of Louisiana had already put its commitment and cash on the table back in 1989. I think it's really important for the legislature and quite frankly the public to understand that it's incredibly dependent, particularly when you look at the number of natural disasters that are happening across the country, that if you want to be in line to benefit from any wallet that's open, you have to have your own wallet on the table. And so I think it is absolutely essential that we make that, that clear to people. Sort of like you go to a hospital and you don't have enough to pay your deductible, you're going to have a hard time getting the treatment you want. That's what we're going to be looking at.
So just jumping back in to convened, so this is one we're going to talk about in detail at the end of this presentation. But this is one that's flexible dollars. It's not state money. This is coming from the federal government. It can be used for restoration and protection. It's annual, so we get it about this time every year. But again, we don't know how much it's going to be because it's dependent upon kind of the global energy system, how much money was collected by the feds over the previous year. Coastal Wetlands Planning Protection and Restoration Act, that Mark just raised, this has been historically between about $30 to $80 million, close to $80 million lately. This is cost share, to Mark's point, 85-15, so it's 85 federal, 15 state. And this is kind of what Mark was saying, this is kind of what that state mineral revenue was initially paired up with to kind of cover this cost in the earliest days. This is a restoration-only funding stream. It's controlled by a COBRA task force that has 5 federal agencies on it. Again, this is an ongoing process that gets done, and that's kind of how they make their decisions. So it's not entirely, it's not at all controlled by the state, but we were one of the task force members in that decision-making process. And then the next couple are going to be the big oil spill funds. So the first one I want to talk about is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the NIPWIF, Environmental Benefit Fund. So these funds are the result of criminal penalties from Deepwater Horizon oil spill. It's $1.272 billion of one-time funds. So once these dollars have been spent, they are spent. This was specifically dedicated to restoration only, barrier islands and river diversions specifically. So that's the only 2 eligible uses of these funds. And these funds, while they are dedicated to those kinds of projects in Louisiana, they are the control of the NIPWIF board of directors. So it's CPRA has projects they want to use those funds for. It's a process with us kind of making project-specific requests to NIPWIF. Yes, the next one, again, this is just kind of background so we know how to talk about the cliff. The Natural Resources Damages Assessment is the biggest oil spill fund funding stream. This is the $5 billion of, again, one-time funds. This is a restoration-only funding stream as well, and in this case, the restoration has to restore for environmental damages caused by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. This one is controlled by a trustee implementation group. So again, kind of similar to the NIPWIF situation, the state is proposing how to spend the funds, and the TIG, as it's known, is kind of approving those expenditures. These annual payments are made to a special account in the Department of the Interior every April, but those payments will end on April of 2031. So this $5 million will be officially in that account, and then these are one-time funds, so they are not to be counted on beyond that date. This pie chart shows kind of how the funding is broken down. So there are within that, ecosystem environmental damages caused by oil spill. There are certain buckets within that adhere to. And then the final one from oil spill is the Restore Act. So all in all, so far, we've gotten about $1 billion, again, of one-time funds through the Restore Act. There are a bunch of different pots or buckets that all have kind of slightly different rules, but overall, this is primarily a restoration bucket, but there are some of these oil buckets that you can do protection projects with, or integrated projects in the case of agency lock that we're pursuing. Again, some of the pots have kind of regular payments through 2031. They can have that same kind of cutoff date where they're not going to get any larger. Pot 1 is going to be no bigger than $260 million. Again, these are one-time funds. Pot 3 is $551 million of one-time funds. And then pot 2, so far we've obtained $184 million of competitive funds there. But that is, we don't know how much more we'll be able to get from that pot because it's competitive. And those are the big kind of revenue streams that you're going to see get rolled up and attached to projects inside our annual plan. So again, this slide from the 24 annual plan shows kind of it's kind of where they all come together into 118 projects, that $1.74 billion that Chip was talking about. And so, so the other way to read this slide, though, right? We've got this huge expenditures. We're building the program that we want to have. But another way to look at this is that 90% of these funds are coming from either the oil spill or surplus dollars. So these are either one-time dollars or non-recurring dollars or unpredictable funds. So they're finite. So they're gone. So I created this little graph just to kind of show, what we're left with. At the end of this 2031 kind of payment process.
Charles, I have a question. So when you hear about like levy projects getting big federal money, how does that, because we talk a lot about the fiscal cliff, and it's really squarely related to some oil spill funds money, right? So how does North Kansas getting $200 million, or how does all of that also factor into this?
So we're trying to talk about money that CPRA has a direct, kind of request to. So some of those federal projects go directly to the Corps, and the Corps is an implementer, and we are partners with the Corps, but we're not necessarily controlling that way. So sometimes we don't.
So we would have a cost share.
Depending on what creates that opportunity. So some are full federal, some are at different cost share amounts. But I think cost share is definitely most of the time on the table for sure. Sometimes so there have been big federal actions that have given a ton of money to the Corps to kind of build out Louisiana priorities that are inside the master plan. So I think that's.
And so we have to earmark the dollars that would be cost shares for that, or identify the projects that we could be used for credit in our funding allocations.
Yes, that's what we do. And Brent's coming up, so I'm going to set a bad one through it. I'll let him.
Yes, so that's correct. The federal dollars that come to the state are not reflected in the annual plan. So if this project is fully federally funded while we're implementing it, we're participating with the Corps as a local sponsor. One of those dollars don't come through any state fund or state budget, so they're not reflected in the annual plan. On projects like organic development, where there's a cost share, we are identifying what we believe our cost share requirement will be for FY24, for example, and that is reflected in the annual plan.
Okay, so it's reflected in the federal projects, is reflected in the annual plan through the cost share that the state has to put up. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. And what's the balance, if you had to estimate how much money that would be, how much do you think that would be?
Oh, that's a good question. It's in the hundreds of millions of dollars for FY24. So we, for example, from Organics of the Gulf, we've identified, we believe, either in-kind work that we've done or cash that we have to meet our entire cost share for that project. For Southwest Coastal, we're not there. We have predicted or identified, I think it's about $40 million, Greg, if I'm not mistaken. But our cost share requirement on that project would be something over $200 million. And so we haven't identified all of that yet, but as we move forward, we will be identifying, hopefully, benefit from the receiving more surplus dollars and other projects that we'll be implementing that can count against that cost share in the future.
So I think Morganza is a little bit of an anomaly, Simone, because we have close to $1 billion worth of work on the ground already between state and locals. So you're referencing the $378 million that we got for Morganza through IIJA. And as Brent just said, we are looking at current work that's on the ground, work that will be completed through agency lock, other levee lifts, other projects as components of Morganza, so that we can satisfy our cost share with that. So I think Morganza, if you set that aside, because I think we're in a good place when it comes to Morganza on meeting the cost share associated with the $378 million. Now, Morganza, the authorized project, is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $3 billion. We don't have all of that money identified just yet. And so as money comes down or is authorized through an expenditure bill in Congress, that's when you're going to see that non-federal share plugged into the master plan for that particular year. So right now, for the $378 million, we're in a good place on Morganza, but I think looking at what the amount of work that the Corps of Engineers is able to do over the next 2 to 3 years on Southwest Coastal, we're able to meet our non-federal cost share, which is outlined in the annual plan. But over the long term for Southwest Coastal, they're close to $300 million. And so that's where we're going to have to really figure out overlaying our priorities with the Corps of Engineers on the timing of work, how much money are they going to allocate in any given year, how much money do we have to come up with on any given year. So it's really kind of a chess game, so to speak. But you will see in the annual plan the non-federal cost share outline. You're not going to see the federal allocation of the annual plan. You only see what we are authorized to spend as a state on the non-federal match.
And my real point, I guess, kind of the line of questioning, Chip, is that y'all get a tremendous investment, right? Like, you are putting this much up and you're getting that much, and so it's hard to reflect that when you're going in front of Ray and on them, and you're trying, you know, it's almost like, just say this is $1.6 billion is one thing, but what you're really getting is $3 billion, right? I mean, that's a simple, like, so it's hard to, that's why I'm trying to think about, like, your return on investment, right? The number 1.6 is one thing, but then your return on investment is, in Chet's sport world, 3 to 1, or whatever, your cost benefit ratio, or whatever. And then my point is that that's really easy to pick off the cost shares, because even $200 million sounds like a lot of money, but, you know, when you have it, that's okay. When restoration does not have that, right? We're just paying out totally. We don't even get more than $200 million. You do, but you understand what I'm saying? It makes it how you think about the balance needs to be too.
Well, so let's take restoration set aside, but if you look over out across the horizon on the protection front, I know Suzanne's back here somewhere, you could potentially have a $4 billion risk reduction system in St. Tammany. You could have a multi-billion-dollar risk reduction system in Upper Barataria. And so those are huge items that we're going to have, huge projects that we're going to have to figure out how to cost share. And so yes, you're going to have probably deferred payment agreements that we have on interest, and we were able to get creative on West Shore Lake Pontchartrain, on working with the Corps of Engineers on restoration projects where the master plan offset that cost share. But this is why we're having this conversation, is because if you look out over the horizon, you can't use BP dollars as a cost share. You have to have, to Mark's point, you have to have your wallet on the table, and you have to have your wallet open with cash in it. And so that's really why we're putting this out there for you guys to absorb it. Charles is going to talk a little bit about some of the efforts that we have underway to show the public that we're not just sitting on our rear end here waiting for this to happen. That we are taking initiative, because we see these projects that are going to be having chief reports and authorizations and hopefully some funding over the next several years. And the money is not there to cost share. So this is the fiscal cliff is coming, and we need to do something about it.
Just a comment too is, I think there's going to be, as those years come upon us, there's going to be some hard discussions with local communities as to how much they're going to be able to put in. Because there's not one project that the majority of what we're seeing in our area that doesn't have a local component to it. Because that's the only way you can put the funding together to make these major, large investments happen in your communities. So, you know, folks that are not used to putting in local dollars and relying solely on state and federal funding, they might not get those projects that they can't find a way to put their own skin in the game as well.
But I think the real question that policymakers under the next governor's administration and legislators that will be reelected is the first slide that Charles put up here is the only annual allocation that we get from the state of Louisiana that is guaranteed under statute is $15 to $30 billion for a $50 billion problem. So it's $15 to $30 billion from the state on an annual basis. Or what is the state $1 million? And so look at where state mineral revenues in this state go for state lands, state water bottoms, oil and gas production, state lands, state water. Look at the vast priorities that are funded with those revenues. And so there's going to be tough conversations this legislative session and in future legislative sessions on what are the true priorities of the state. Because one of the things that you're going to hear us say in session this year when we're presenting the master plan, I don't know whether y'all recognize this or not, but this issue affects every single aspect of Louisiana. Healthcare, you have the best hospital in the world, 4 feet of water in, it's useless. I don't know if you've ever seen a state prison be evacuated. It's horrible. In Idaho, we had to evacuate LCIW, and I saw what it took to evacuate several hundred inmates out of prison. It affects criminal justice reform. If you look at elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, ports, roads, bridges, you know what happens when the Mississippi River shuts down because our electrical grid infrastructure is in complete disarray? There's national implications on that. And so that's the thing, is we've got to broaden our perspective when it comes to this issue in a way that gets people's attention, not just from South Louisiana, but from North Louisiana as well. 1.76 billion is impressive. But that progress that we've enjoyed over the last several years is going to halt unless we can make up that funding somehow. And so it's going to take not just CPRA leadership, not just the governor, but it's going to take every stakeholder group in this room to make that happen.
I think Mark had a question.
Yeah, well, actually, it's an observation, but I'm glad it came up about impacts on local governments and communities, because a big part of this coastal master plan, especially the adaptive parts, fall on projects that are not these large coastal restoration projects. And the ability to hold up their end of this program or scale it so the expectations are correct. Also, we've already mentioned insurability, and again, land loss. All these things are going to be robbing local communities of their ability to finance their own future. We just have to be honest about that. And I think we have to find ways of directing dollars where those dollars need to go, and working with those communities to make sure they can be administered well. I don't think it's any mystery that when large chunks of money show up in any community, whether it's New York, New Orleans, wherever, it's easy for them to be overwhelmed. We need to be thinking about how do we ensure that the capacity to administer and deliver comes with whatever dollars we get. Because I hope we never get another shot at DP money. The notion that catastrophe is a financing plan is one we must reject.
I just have one more thing. I'm glad Brent's still up there, so you remind me of the specifics, but there's been a really interesting dynamic afoot for the last 20 years. You see the need for levees for games to go. You see BP funding
arriving on the heels of environmental damage and destruction. And so there's a lot of push-pull in quiet dialogue and policy in different places about restoration funding and protection funding. And we need to continue to, as we move forward and we envision this fiscal cliff coming, we all need to be mindful that the coastal master plan requires that balance of 50-50 protection with restoration. And that is going to be a big need. That balance is going to be a big need to find moving forward. We have 3 creative solutions that have been implemented over the years that we need to build on, we need to talk about. The first of which was in the QUIPA program, and I don't recall the specifics, Brent, you can remind me, but shore protection has been done within the QUIPA program for years and years and years. But it's called restoration because there's that element of marsh creation that must couple with the rock and the shore protection, right? To be able to couple those makes the project stronger, more long-standing. And what was the breakdown of the percentages on that? There's a percentage restoration, there's a percentage marsh creation, let's kind of be shore protection. Anyway, it doesn't, yeah, there is that, but that's important because when we call QUIPA restoration only, there's actually a really heavy element of shore protection embedded there because the two couple well. And then conversely, when you talk about levee projects, and I've talked to Wendell about this, Carol a billion times, and many others that work in the levee arena, marsh aprons and work on the outside of the levee system to protect the system itself from the onslaught, direct onslaught, storm surge is critical. It protects the system. Those coupled together make the protection stronger. And then the final nail in the coffin, obviously the state's been working toward this for decades, is Maripos swamp restoration as a coastal master plan project coupled with a gigantic federal levee system. That is our ticket. We must continue to press on the federal government to recognize that angle approach as a combination 1-2 punch, NER and NED in complement moving forward. And I think that the reason I even mention this is because with all these restoration dollars, and restore all these restoration dollars that have been here that are leaving, and let's find ourselves in the needs for this levee protection. We all in this room have to keep our eye on both. It is not one or the other. The master plan edicts 50-50, and I just think it's going to be a harder conversation than we may realize in the next few years. So, there's my speech.
Well, thanks. It's been a great discussion. I'm just going to forward us into kind of some other existing efforts to add on to what Sophia was just mentioning that we're pursuing now. As Chip said, this is not an issue that we've been waiting. We're not waiting until 2032 to kind of start learning about this. We've done a lot of work to kind of educate people about what these funding streams are, aren't, and just kind of done a lot of work around this issue for some time. And the 3 that I want to kind of focus on today is ongoing efforts that just to make you guys aware of have to do with federal policy action, offshore wind, and carbon crediting are the kind of 3 big buckets that I just want to raise today. So the first one is kind of expanding GOMESA. So making GOMESA more fair to coastal producing states has been one of Louisiana's biggest priorities, basically since the passage of GOMESA in 2006. Last year we came very close to getting the cap lifted from GOMESA, and we're expanding our efforts this year to reach even more states and even more advocates to kind of get working on this. So just a few weeks ago, about 70 people went up to Washington, D.C. to do a big lobbying effort. We've touched about 70 members of Congress. And this coalition that we've created called the Shores Coalition has about 185 members in it now. So we've really kind of expanded this effort. We're working really hard on this right on the heels of that trip, and many of y'all saw this in the news probably. CPRA and NOVA were pleased to celebrate the House, including some provisions that would reform GOMESA within the Lower Energy Cost Act that Representative Seascliffe just got kind of past that first hurdle there. So this is a big effort. What we've estimated is that it could take GOMESA conservatively from about $130 million program to maybe a $285 million program. It would also bring additional dollars to the locals. Kind of again, to Mark's point, locals have to have the ability to kind of participate in these things as well. That's over 10 years projection. Again, GOMESA dollars are these flexible dollars, so this is a way that you can have a restoration program and a protection program. using these dollars. These would go to the state trust fund. And on an annual basis. So reforming the Mesa is really a key action that we're pushing on. Within a lot of these GoMesa reforms are the ability to kind of also capture some offshore wind revenues. So this is a major avenue that the state is getting behind. There's so many benefits to offshore wind, not just clean renewable energy, but and the workforce, overlaps with the oil and gas work going on today, and our historic strengths there. But this is also another place where to have a viable offshore wind industry, you've got to have a healthy coast, and so we think that tie is really important to make. And so there's a federal lease sale planned for this summer in the Gulf of Mexico, and right now there's not a mechanism to kind of make sure that those dollars kind of come back to the state. So we're working on that on the federal side through the RISE Act provisions, and the Shores Coalition is working on that. HB 636 by Representative Orgeron was brought up last year. This year, Russell, correct me if I'm wrong, HB 99 is the new bill number for this year. We're trying to create this dedication of these federal energy dollars, whether they're wind or oil and gas, to the Coastal Trust Fund. Again, that's a bill we're going to want your help on this session. And on the state side, Representative Zarang was able to kind of help modify the state leasing program, the state waters, to make it more favorable for offshore wind. So this is a big area that we're working on, and will kind of need some attention kind of in the next immediate future, as well as kind of the long term. And then the last one I wanted to touch on is kind of is the most kind of unknown in terms of the size of the funding or how it would actually work. But this is an issue that we have looked at back in 2012, and there's more and more interest in it every single day. And that's kind of this idea of voluntary carbon market or carbon crediting for the Western Wetlands restoration side of the shop at CPRA. So this came up in the climate plan that Olivia's going to talk about in just a minute. And the idea basically is that CPRA, we've got to do work on the science side and on the regulatory policy side to figure out how are we measuring and monitoring the ability for wetlands systems to kind of capture carbon, and then how can we kind of turn around and create a framework that allows us to kind of monetize that in some voluntary way. So this is ongoing work. There are lots of places around the country, more and more all the time, that are kind of tapping into this. One analog, just to kind of give somewhat of a dollar amount on this, is the Reggie system. It's a 12-state or 10-state market. Over the whole market, they were able to raise about $270 million. So is this a $25 million opportunity for Louisiana? Is this we don't really know yet what size it is, but it's an important area of focus kind of moving forward. And so any number of these probably deserve their own full-time presentation, and maybe it's something the finance or the law policy funding group wants to get into in more detail, but did want to kind of set the stage kind of so you understood kind of the funding that we do tap into. Some of them are running out, some of the biggest ones. We've got some ideas on the table, but those ideas are not going to get us all the way back to this $1 billion a year level we want to be at. You guys mentioned so many different reasons why we want to stay at $1 billion. We've got to add more solutions to the table. So there's more work ongoing right now. I know we'll hear more about it this summer, maybe just very soon. But did want to just kind of put this issue on the table for this commission today. I think that's all I have on this slide. So I don't know if there are additional questions or if we want to move on.
I don't see any questions, so let's just move on.
That's not a question, it's more. That's okay. With the carbon capture legislation, Speaker Snyder dropped HB 571. The way that some of that money from the companies flows into the state, and Russell, I'll take a look at this. I think some of it actually goes into state mineral revenues, so I don't know if that would give us an increase in funding that would come to the coastal program, but it's just something to monitor.
That is something to monitor. That's good. So the mineral revenues that we get, there are all kinds of triggers built in there. So the state gets $5 million automatically no matter what. But then if we get $15 million, if we get $30 million, depends on kind of the total amount of revenues that the state is getting for these mineral things. And so if this speaker's bill is successful and additional dollars are coming into there, it could help us meet some of those trigger points at the very least. But what I think is important is that, at least the way it's set up now, it wouldn't turn it from a $25, $30 million maximum into a 50 or 100. It would just kind of make it more of a, you have a better chance of getting that extra $5 million or that extra $2 million or whatever it would be. But I did not see that net thing. Okay. All right.
All right, thank you, Charles.
Thanks, everybody.
Now we're going to roll Olivia about the 2023 climate action plan. Okay, thank you, Charles. Y'all can hear me good? Yes. Okay. I'm going to give a quick overview of the Climate Initiatives Task Force 2023 annual report. Start off with the Louisiana Climate Action Plan that was adopted by the governor and the task force on February 1, 2022, and 1 year later, we adopted the annual report. To brief you on the Climate Action Plan, it's made up of 8 portfolio sections across the economy with 84 specific implementable actions to get us to net zero by 2050. And this pathway to net zero chart shows us how we can get there. And the Climate Action Report is a status update on what has been implemented to advance this climate action in year 1. It was a 6-month process, and in that process, we engaged our task force and stakeholders to get these updates. This slide just shows the breadth of funding coming down from federal opportunities through the IIJ and IRA funding and how we can implement this through climate action. And the annual report really goes to show how if we align with stakeholders, we can competitively apply for this funding. Now I'm going to get into the section breakdown really quickly. I'm not going to go over all sections, just a few, to show you major projects that have happened in this first year. To start off, we're going to talk about the clean energy transition. Louisiana is laying the foundation for our clean, renewable, and resilient power grid. Notable to this section is large-scale solar projects, tripling our solar generation, and offshore wind that Charles mentioned. We still happening this year in the summer. We are going to also, communities are making progress in distributed energy and microgrids, and examples are Community Lighthouse Program and the Get Lit, Stay Lit initiatives. Each section also talks about where we go next for climate action in the plan and on the slides. Industrial decarbonization. In this section, very notable is the $21 billion in announced projects across industry to decarb. And partners are supporting a comprehensive approach to decarbonization, like the Carbon Reduction Alliance that has been formed. Transportation development in the built environment. This section really focuses on electric vehicle deployment. We have $73 million in federal grants coming to Louisiana to build out the state's EV charging network, and this is happening over the next 5 years. Louisiana is also establishing a framework for statewide planning. We have our first statewide planning officer in the Department of Administration, and our reports are actively reducing emissions. Natural working lands and wetlands. Louisiana is investing in the conservation of its natural lands, and there are through sources like the Outdoor Forever program, and then there are many local efforts underway for farmers to climate smart. Agroforestry is partnering with local farmers to do these conservation formula grants. And then, of course, last but not least, the major theme is advancing coastal protection and restoration through our coastal master plan. And also, where we go next in this section focuses on the carbon markets analysis, as Charles mentioned. An inclusive low-carbon economy. Clean energy build-out and industrial decarbonization projects are major sources of new jobs. So this section really focuses on our workforce and partnering with colleges and community colleges. University of Lafayette is housing the Louisiana Solar Energy Lab. The last section to go over today is the accountability and adaptability to ensure lasting success. Louisiana is committed to climate action, and we really showcase this through bringing our stakeholders together through workshops. The Climate Task Force has held 2 public workshops, and the governor has held 2 cabinet-level workshops to align on federal funding opportunities.
And then we are developing metrics to track accountability of climate action and equity. And then the Climate Task Force has also really worked with local communities who are leading the charge of climate action. Both the cities of Gonzales and New Orleans have developed climate action plans. So that was a section by section breakdown just to name some of the projects in the report. There's lots more in the actual report. But this slide right here shows the breadth of work being done across the board. And we are excited that we have we have implemented actions in every section of the climate plan. This also shows we have where we are leading and where we have more work to do. But this is what year one of climate action in Louisiana looks like. So that was it, and here's some resources, or you can ask me and Charles any other questions. Yes.
Thank you for that. One of the things that, I get a lot of calls about with some of these projects, whether it's hydrogen or where we're going to be doing carbon capture, many of which are in aquatic environments. Obviously, it's taking these water bodies, which makes them attractive. Has there been a policy set to concentrate on those environments as opposed to terrestrial ones or others? Because obviously, some aspects of carbon capture or alternative energy can be done in a number of places, whereas some of these aquatic environments do not have substitute locations. So I'm just curious, have we made a policy determination that we really want to concentrate on these areas? And what should we do? I guess how much of that aspect of the climate action plan is really water dependent, coastal water dependent?
I would say that the plan is kind of at a higher level than that. It's not really gotten down into those weeds yet. And as Meg mentioned, there's not just one bill, but a whole stack of bills that are getting at that question and others kind of surrounding that. So I think that that's just kind of future work to get at. So we definitely have, carbon capture was discussed a lot and all the meetings throughout it was the lightning rod, in the entire planning process. And so it's going to be important to see kind of where the state is kind of continuing to kind of refine its position there.
Similarly, I know we just talked about the budget, and there's a lot of concerns with carbon capture, but one of them is the impacts on the environment, right? And so we're talking about the budget and what projects we have prepared for. And carbon capture has a negative impact on the ecosystem. What's the cost in terms of us doing restoration for those projects? Because it could likely happen where we're doing carbon capture, it destroys ecosystems, and you have an additional burden and cost that we've already seen from oil, natural gas, LNG, and so on, where all of these energy resources are upfront really good in terms of job making and income. But on the back end, we have to cover the costs for damage to the environment. So when we're talking about expanding the carbon capture market, we also have to really understand that could mean our budget for CPRA will explode, potentially. So are there studies being made right now for the negative impacts on that cost and who is going to be responsible for those costs associated?
I haven't looked at all the bills, but I do think at least one of them has to do with
it's like some of the legislation that's written is liability, or there's pieces of liability with their associated with their projects. So I think they're still working out all those details. We're following it, but again, like Charles said, it's going to kind of be where the legislature goes and how we edit that legislation.
And to what degree is it handled through normal mitigation kind of processes, or is it beyond that?
Yeah, I think being more proactive about it instead of waiting on liability until after something happens. Because again, it could blow up the budget, and then what is the plan after that? And also, from my understanding, the liability laws are not very strong for carbon capture federally. So that again, that puts the burden and cost on Louisiana to cover. So I just really want to push that. I was just in the carbon capture conversation. The liability laws are not shown for carbon capture. We'll have to cover that cost too. So I think it's important to do as many studies as possible to understand the cost burden before we enact law for liability.
Has the energy intensity of restoration and protection projects been accounted for in the carbon calculations?
In the inventory?
Already, yeah. I mean, thinking about $1 billion a year seems like a lot of emissions, and I wonder if there's an opportunity for the state to lead by example and give preference to companies that maybe use renewable resource, fuels or whatever in that.
I know that did come up during the planning. I don't know what phase of implementation we're at for that, but just the lead by example statewide, clearly. And then how can certain agencies that might have more of an impact, more of a line with these kinds of larger concerns be in the front of the line to lead? We've talked about it, but I don't know where it is right now. It does take a lot of diesel fuel to go on dredge, but I think a balance is the benefits outweigh the costs, for sure.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you. All right, holistic coastal resilience.
Hey guys, we are giving you the full rundown on all the big topics, and after this is going to be the master plan. So, thank you for your attention and the questions. And this is the last kind of. I'm sorry, those are my kids. I'm using my laptop here today. So last meeting, Chip really did a nice job, just kind of inside the funding conversation about all the reasons that the coastal program is so important. And I think the adaptive governance initiative really tries to pick up that idea and just kind of spread the responsibility around and spread the level of concern and spread the idea that everybody needs to be adapting to all these changes that we're facing. That's kind of what we're here about. So I've got another map from the master plan to kind of kick off this conversation. And this is the one, again, this is future with action. Kind of like I showed at the beginning of the funding conversation. This is showing with all these levy projects that we proposed in the 23 plan. Again, we can do an awesome job of reducing flood depths, but there is still going to be impacts to the entire coast of Louisiana. So this problem is too big for a single agency. The implications are too vast for a single agency. This is a statewide, community by community issue. We also know that we can't really control to a large degree, when the hurricanes come or where they hit, but we can control kind of how well we're organized, how well the systems operate that kind of are built up to enhance resilience for our communities and for the different state agencies that are there. And then finally, I think that we've all kind of known and realized through this work on resilience is that keeping water out of your house or out of your hospital is crucially important. But there's so many other things that we have to kind of keep our eye on as we're building out a future for Louisiana that have to do with building resilience. So you've got to have a healthy environment. You need job opportunities. You need a doctor's office and a grocery store, and you need to be able to afford to live there. Kind of back to the insurability question. All these things are happening, and CPRA is not the one to kind of lead the charge on each and every one of those single things. So through the Adaptive Governance Initiative, we've been trying to activate every corner of state government and kind of interact more proactively, in a more integrated way to kind of leverage partnerships and kind of really do forward-looking planning. Our kind of goals were, everybody needs to understand these maps, everybody needs to understand these issues, and understand their relationship to the coastal crisis. How is this going to affect you today and in the future? We have all this information and data at CPRA. You should use that to make informed decisions, as you're kind of doing your planning. And then again, working together and kind of understanding those relationships, we can kind of be more proactive and more adaptive as a government. And And so part of this too, in terms of bringing in other state agencies and kind of working across government in kind of more enhanced ways, we created this framework for resilience that has a place for everybody, no matter what kind of entity you represent or where you're coming from. There's a piece, there's a role for you in this kind of larger resilience conversation. So yes, we need levees and a more robust built environment. And yes, we need marsh creation and diversions and barrier islands and a sustainable natural environment. We also need vibrant economic activity. We need health, opportunity, culture, all these things for communities and residents. We need to kind of address the social side, the economic side, the environmental side, and the infrastructure side all at the same time. And so through our work, we kind of given kind of some tasks, some activities to kind of work through an executive order. We created within the coastal office a CRO position, so that's my role. I've been leading this effort alongside CPEX and Jeanette. Here we've got resilience coordinators in every state agency, so we have somebody to talk to, somebody to kind of work through this with. And we've had every state agency doing three things. First, assessing their vulnerabilities to the coastal crisis. Second, figuring out what does adaptation look like to them? How can they kind of be prepared to be more resilient today, but also looking ahead to the future? And then how do we institutionalize these activities for the long term? Because again, we're going to be managing this coast for the long term. We need to be kind of thinking about adaptation for the long term as well. So the first thing we did do was understanding agency vulnerabilities, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I did want to point out that we were able to kind of directly here to kind of point people to the Coastal Master Plan viewer. How to use this information, figure out where projects are planned in the future, where we're doing work, what the flow is going to look like, build that into the way that you make decisions. So we kind of started with that, and then kind of the final product, we had agencies kind of fill out these progress reports. They were able to say, okay, here's what my role is in responding to the coastal crisis. Here's how these problems are going to affect me today and in the future, most significant impacts, and then they were able to lay out their adaptation strategies and then talk about how their efforts to kind of build resilience would also support the coastal master plan. So kind of tying it all together in a comprehensive vision at the end. And so happy to say we had 12 agencies kind of complete this work towards the end of last year. And it was just really exciting to see how so many agencies, once they were kind of like invited into this conversation, really did kind of rise to the occasion and really have a lot to say and really kind of did they do so much in this space already. They just weren't using these words or weren't understanding all the connections that they could be making. So that was really exciting. These partnerships have continued, into this year. We're working on both through just kind of regular normal interactions, which kind of weren't always there before, which is a good thing. We had a bunch of state employees at the Center for River Studies last month, kind of coming in, getting beyond just the resilience coordinator, getting lower level staff to come see it, come engage with this issue, this problem. And together we're working on kind of again with this partnership idea. I and CPRA are kind of working across agencies on different applications to IIJA or IRA funding. There are all these opportunities that are kind of underway right now. So the last piece of our kind of like our report out, again after a year of working with the state agencies, we kind of put out this report and kind of created this resilient agenda, some recommendations that we made kind of throughout there. And here's kind of a summary of those. We thought that this having somebody dedicated to this effort was important. So this CRO position did need to stick around to advance this coordination and adaptation throughout Louisiana. It was important to kind of maintain these connections across agencies with the resilience coordinators. But the resilience coordinators need more help. This is not like a one and done kind of a thing. We need to have more adaptation options for them. We need to be thinking more harder about multi-benefit projects, more integrated projects and programs that can kind of really deliver resilience gains for the state. We should also be thinking beyond just the coast, right? All of Louisiana is seeing these issues from natural disasters and other things that need to be kind of thought about in an adaptive way. And then there's obviously partners beyond state government that we need to be engaging with. So stakeholders like yourselves in this room, also local government is like a big obvious one that we need to really be helping locals kind of be proactive, just like we were with the state. We are working right now to include some resilience and data needs inside the capital outlay process. And so not this year, but maybe in future years, you'll be able to kind of see how many projects are proposed. Are we asking questions about the flood risk today, the flood risk in the future? If this building or facility is supposed to last for 50 years, well, can we use the information we know about the next 50 years to make sure that that state investment will last for its intended life? So that's underway right now. It's early days for that. We're working with GOSEP on pursuing an enhanced hazard mitigation plan. We're also working to coordinate just more closely between CPRA, OCD, and GOSEP. Again, so much of this is kind of about what happens after a disaster, and so we want to get those three agencies kind of just on the same page more often. And then we also have an idea that, a recommendation here that receiving communities, this idea that people are making decisions in the aftermath of storms to move. We want to be helping receiving communities kind of welcome them, be prepared from an infrastructure way, be able to invest in their community today. And then the last one, obviously, is expanded capacity. So it was kind of the years that we were working on this, most directly state agencies were just back-to-back disasters, and people were stretched thin. And it did keep seeming like, even though we were trying to give them as many tools as possible, it was extra. It's like, how can I do this as well as everything else and respond to a disaster? And so expanding capacity is just our last kind of recommendation on this. And then the last thing for this group, I just wanted to let you know that we did create resource pages on the CPRA website. So within key initiatives on the CPRA website, you can find not just these reports, but also a manual. So if you're in local government and you want to figure out, well, how can I kind of walk through these steps and build resilience? Here, there's a manual for you. There's a manual for state agencies for the next administration. We've got vulnerability assessment templates and report card templates too, just ways to kind of take these tools that we did at the state level and use them other places. Any questions about that piece of work?
Well, I'd just like to say that it represents a tremendous amount of work, and the irony is you're trying to be adaptive and resilient in the middle of crises. So, yeah. Any questions or comments?
Thanks. Again, these are all just tastes for different issues that can come up, and we've delved into deeper at the different sentences in the future if we wanted to.
All right, thank you, Charles. And I want to talk with you just briefly today, just a little bit of an update on kind of where we are with the 2023 Coastal Master Plan and the FY24 annual plan that we spoke with you about. I think that was at the last meeting. As you've seen some of this before, but I just want to kind of refresh everybody's memory. So we released the 2023 Coastal Master Plan on January 26th. The public comment period for that was open through the 25th last month, so it closed just about a week and a half ago. We held 4 public hearings. We had a lot of additional meetings. We met with the St. Tammany Drainage and Levee District, for example, the Bayou Cultural Collaborative. We were in St. James Parish at the Baton Levee District office for an additional meeting there as well. Lots of meetings with elected officials, different stakeholder groups, and individuals. We were in Washington, D.C. at the end of last month, and there were a lot of conversations held about draft master plan there as well. So we handed out about 500 printed copies, but I think more impressively about 6,600 unique users viewing the draft plan online. There were over 1,800 unique views of the data viewer that we talked about when we were here with you last time as well, totaling about 60,000 views. And most impressive, it doesn't seem like a long time, but in this day and age of click and move on, the average time that folks were on that website was about 4.5 minutes, which again, doesn't seem that long to many of us, but it's an eternity in today's digital age. So it represents a pretty high level of engagement of folks interested in seeing what we have to offer and what we're presenting to folks. So in terms of the numbers of comments we received, there's just over 200. 47 of those received at the public meetings that I mentioned, the 4 public hearings that we held. 162 were submitted either electronically, via email, the web form, or through the mail. Most of the projects were very complimentary. were supportive of the plan. Certainly happy to report that. There were, of course, some comments that were critical, and I will say that even those critical comments were very thoughtful and constructive. And they're really centered around a couple of things, revisions that can be made in this draft plan, and I'll go over a few of those themes here in just a moment, but a lot of discussion about improvements to process. And so that's a good thing. That's what the comment period is for, right? We want to hear about not just the document itself, but how we can do better and conduct our business better as we move forward into the 2029 plan development. So it's always difficult to sort of quantify these kind of comments, right? We've received a lot of letters, there are written comments, or verbal comments that are transcribed, but we can categorize those into certain themes. And so you see some of the main themes that we saw in the comments that were received today. So shoreline protection, of course, was a big thing, as it has been over the last several master plans in the southwestern portion of the state. Most of the comments were received there centered around shoreline protection and including that in the plan. It is included in the plan, by the way. And then also kind of a renewed interest in risk reduction in that portion of the state. So certainly the hurricanes, Hurricane Laura, Hurricane Delta, have definitely renewed an interest in exploring some more structural risk reduction options in the southwestern portion of the state. And so you'll see in the final plan that will be released actually 2 weeks from now, will reflect that desire. In fact, I believe we have a meeting Monday to start those discussions and to try to use some of the master plan tools to help evaluate some of those options. So, ridge restoration was something that was mentioned quite a bit in the comments that we received. There were not as many ridges in this draft master plan as have been included in the past. There's a desire, of course, to include those kind of projects for a lot of reasons, one of which is that it provides some really unique habitat across our coast that's not typically present along our coast, and so you'll see some additional ridges in a final plan that will be presented to our board in a couple of weeks now. A lot of comments about smart planning and coordination with the watershed initiative, so folks are very interested, and we heard this again both verbally and written comments about how we're developing low-lying areas, making sure that we're doing that in a smart way, in a way that's sustainable. And certainly Charles touched on some of that here just a minute ago, but then also that relates very closely with coordination with the watershed initiative. And I can tell you, I think I can speak for Chairman Klein that we're doing as much of that as we possibly can and pushing the watershed initiative to move out on projects. We, of course, are a member of that council and have been doing that really from the get-go. Risk rating 2.0 has already been mentioned, but that was something that was a theme, and you'll see a revised section in the final plan related to risk rating 2.0 that I think will be much better received than what was in the original plan, which I will readily admit was a bit of a placeholder as we were putting the draft out, but it's much improved. Hypoxia was another thing mentioned. It was in the draft, not much of a mention about how our restoration projects can potentially address the Gulf hypoxia program or problem, and so you'll see some of that in the final plan as well. Project-specific concerns and sort of project level engagement was something that was mentioned. And this was a little bit of a head scratcher, I have to admit, but there was a lot of comments about just sort of the details of individual projects. While that is appreciated and we want to hear those things, the master plan sort of comment period is not necessarily the time for those things to be heard. And so I want to be clear, both to the folks in this room and to the general public, that there's lots of opportunity for comment and input on specific projects as we move forward. So as we develop projects, as we include those in our annual plan, as they're permitted, as environmental documentation is prepared for those, there will be an awful lot of opportunity for folks to comment and express any concerns they may have or any suggestions that they may have that will make those projects better. So equity was a theme that was hit on a good bit. I think we've improved kind of our approach to that in the 2023 master plan through the expected annual structure damage, which removes sort of the value portion of the expected annual damages calculations that were done. That's something that certainly we can get better at and continue to get better at as we're moving into 2029. Then outreach and transparency of the process was something that we heard a good bit about. I will say that I think we did a pretty good job at that, and there was a lot of support about what we had done. But this is sort of one of those things where you're never done. You can always do better, right? And certainly we recognize that. But I will say that with each iteration of the master plan, I think we our outreach and engagement and the transparency of the process has improved. We've improved the data viewer, the data portal, so most of the data that was went into developing the models, and the master plan will be available shortly. We've got the master plan project viewer, of course, available, and there are literally 15, 20 hours of presentations related to all aspects of the master plan that are available and recorded for folks to be able to dive into if they'd like to. And then addressing the causes of climate change was something that we heard a little bit about as well. And so you'll see a little bit of a beefed up discussion related to that. We just had a discussion, of course, of the climate action plan. That's really where that discussion, I think, needs to sit. But you will see some of that beefed up in the final plan that will be presented in just a couple of weeks. We're going to touch a little bit on the annual plan as well, the FY24 annual plan. So this is a master plan year. Kind of most of the focus of the comments that we received were on the master plan, but we did receive a handful on the annual plan. Again, most of those were very positive and constructive as well. So you see kind of a word cloud here. Most of the themes that you see, the larger the word essentially was the more times the word was actually mentioned in the comments. So you see plan, projects, coastal, things that you would certainly imagine, but funding, chapel line, fiscal, things like that were sort of the comments that we received. But again, by and large, most of the comments on the annual plan were very positive and constructive. We did something new this year in the annual plan. We typically release a draft that includes kind of the numbers and the graphs and schedules and so forth, and doesn't include any front-end material that has some of the history of CPRA, some of the history of our project highlights and things of that nature. We're able to include that in the draft this year, which we understand is very helpful to many folks just to digest information in the plan and to use it as a tool, as an outreach tool. Many of you can use it as an outreach tool as well. So got some good positive feedback from that aspect of the changes to the plan as well. I will say, and this relates to a comment that we heard earlier related to sort of leveraging of dollars. And just if you look at the surplus dollars that were requested, Chairman Klein mentioned $157 million has been identified. That will leverage over $186 million. So it's more than, those dollars will be more than double if they're all approved by the state legislature. So we have taken a look at that in parts of the annual plan, and it's just an important point to note, particularly if you were talking to our legislators who will be reviewing and approving that plan as we enter session. So in terms of the timeline, I mentioned the master plan was released on January 6th. The annual plan was released on the 18th of January. You can see where the location and the times for official public hearings that we held. Those were just four of many meetings that were held, of course. Public comment period on the 25th. We'll be presenting both of these plans to our board on the 19th. And the final plans will be submitted to the legislature following the opening of the legislature, following the 19th, but the legislature opens on April 10th of this year. So with that, I know that was brief. You will see some bright, shiny new documents, some of the changes that I just highlighted, mentioned in it on the 19th of this year, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about any of this.
Thank you, Bruce. Also represents a lot of progress and hard work. If I have any questions, that was a very detailed presentation that you gave to us, otherwise we appreciate it. I'll write up part of it.
Postal day, you want to make some
I did. It was already mentioned earlier, I guess, but I want to just take a second, just take a swing at it if I can. So Coastal Day is April 24th. We'll actually be hosting, there'll be activities all week, in fact. But a couple things I want to highlight. Chip already mentioned on the Coastal Day, the activities at the legislature, Crawford's Bowl, and so forth. There will be something we've heard a lot this year is companies, in particular smaller companies, interested in making connections with some of the bigger companies that we do work with, some of the larger contractors, some of the larger consultants, for example. And so we put a lot of emphasis this year on the morning of the 24th, having a networking opportunity that we'll be hosting in Central River Studies to do that. We already have almost 50 companies registered for that. If you're interested in that, or you know someone who is interested in that opportunity, please get either with me or with Greg, and we can let you know how to correct you for that as well. So in addition, we'll be presenting upcoming work that CPRA will be doing so that folks can know what's on the horizon. We'll be hosting an event where our partners, levy districts, parishes, NGOs, and so forth will present some of the work that they'll be doing over the next couple of years. again, so that companies would be aware of that. And we'll have a series of webinars, they'll be virtual webinars throughout the week as well, about various topics related to the postal program, so people can be aware of what all's happening there. So just wanted to give that another look. If folks are interested and will participate in that, this is been a real point of emphasis for us this year.
One of the things I want to just put on the record, there's been a lot of conversations with multiple coastal parishes over the last several weeks, and I know that you will agree with this. There are a lot of good projects that are not included in the state master plan. Projects that are complementary to or consistent with the master plan. And a lot of those projects are being led by various parishes, that they have progressed these projects through engineering and design. They're looking for construction funding. And so I want to just make everyone aware that just because you don't see a project in the master plan doesn't necessarily mean that it is a bad project or should not be funded. And so we've had conversations with Jefferson Parish and St. Bernard Parish in recent weeks about projects that they're moving forward with on their Go Mesa dollars. And they're going to be going to the feds for additional federal dollars or grant opportunities. And we are happy at CPRA to provide a letter of support for those types of projects if they are consistent with and complementary to the master plan. If you are implementing a project that is inconsistent or that trips over another project included in the master plan, obviously you're going to get concern from the state. But don't think just because you are representing a parish, representing Pierre Vallow, that St. Bernard can continue doing some of the things that they're doing because it's not in the master plan. Because there a lot of the projects that St. Bernard is prioritized work in conjunction with other projects that are in the master plan. And if you're willing to put local skin in the game, then we're obviously very happy to provide letters of support for those types of projects, putting on the record that they're complementary and consistent with the master plan. So just because you don't see a project in the master plan doesn't mean it's not a good project. Doesn't mean that it should not move forward. So I just want to hopefully provide some level of comfort to parish representatives, or all of you may be working on various restoration protection projects within your own capacity. So just know that.
Yep. Well, I said it a lot as we were developing the 2017 master plan, and I'll say it again. While the master plan is intended sort of to focus all of our efforts, right, it's not intended to preclude anybody from doing one of those good projects that Chip just mentioned. So anyway, appreciate that comment, Chip.
I have a question about this. Are the coastal parishes required to, I guess, submit the project to check for consistency with their coastal master plan?
That occurs generally through the permitting process, but honestly, it generally occurs well before that. And we've got good working relationships with all the coastal parishes. If they have an idea of how to do something, typically we'll have that conversation, well ahead of time.
Thank you.
Just putting it, is all of the parish level projects, are they available in one place to be viewed? Maybe that would be helpful for parish leadership and also residents to understand this is a parish project versus a security project versus a Mesa project. People don't know the difference, they just know that this is a project they're not.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's not a list that we maintain. And that would be something that would be, at the parish level, maintained by each of the individual parishes. But as I mentioned, as part of the Coastal Day, we do invite the parishes to present on upcoming work that will be coming down the line. So that information, some of that information at least will be available there, but it's not a comprehensive list, which I think is what you're referring to.
Any other comments or questions?
I'm going to make a comment and try to frame it properly. And I'm coming back to something Chairman Klein mentioned earlier about interruptions in navigation related to failure of electrical grid. I will say there's a lot to that. But I'll also say that even after Hurricane Katrina, we were moving ships on the river during daylight hours, only a few days late. Some of the major problems were related to people getting people to docks, the infrastructure being down. And then I'll come back to complementary to or consistent with, which we do have a letter on beneficial use of dredge material. I will say the historical event that shut the Mississippi River down for the longest period of time that I'm aware of was a vessel going aground, hard aground in the Powhatan anchorage, which has severe shoaling in it and is still the most likely place for a vessel to go around and shut the river down. The methodology to recover after such a grounding would be the same as it was in 1989, is to get dredges on site, get tugboats on site, can they lighter the vessel in place? All those kind of actions would take about the same time. So, and I really do honestly appreciate noting the importance of the river. But I also think this is a place where I refer to myself as a navigation guy, as a navigation person. That is one of the biggest concerns that we have is due to changes in the lower river. I took a call, the Corps Maintenance Forum meeting was this morning, I took it outside earlier. They're talking about efforts to control the flow at Neptune Pass. These are some of the real challenges that navigation is concerned about. We realize that there are balance and environmental impacts and community impacts, but at the end of the day, commerce is also being challenged by some of these methodologies. So we have recently, as you know, the Mississippi River Commission come down. The main concern from pilots from the navigation industry is related to the changes in the lower river, multiple crevasses on the eastern side of the river between Bellchase and New Orleans, and the projects. The only solutions we see are to work on, I'll say, filling in, for lack of a better term, to try to control. And I think part of the importance here is related to two budgets, not financial, but water budget. I'll call it a freshwater budget and a sediment budget. And when we have these areas, after the grounding of the Marshall Cunha in 1989, and I remember my former boss's solution was to blow up this Russian vessel. Of course, that's not what was done, but I still like to kid him about that every now and then. But the importance to the nation meant that after that grounding, there were multiple congressional hearings, and there were agreements to work to maintain the Mississippi River navigation channel because of the importance to the industry. So, and again, I'll note that you made a reference to the river and you're talking about threats to it. And electrical, cybersecurity, of course, huge problems. But the one that took the longest to recover from was just one vessel going aground. Over 100 ships were anchored off of Southwest Pass. I know the Suez Canal issues and it's still fresh in memory. Some of the words we hear a lot in Congress are supply chain. Of course, everybody's definition is a little different, but the importance of keeping the supply chain open. And again, we do have that approval as complementary to or consistent with the state master. Thank you.
Sean, I think those are really good points, and maybe I didn't really articulate what I was saying about the electrical grid infrastructure falling into the river. It's really a both and, because the point I'm trying to make is if our electrical grid infrastructure is susceptible and vulnerable to surge and hurricanes strength winds, that's an issue. And especially if the electrical grid infrastructure is falling into one of the most important navigation channels in this country, and it's shutting it down. And so you call, Energy had a line that fell into the river, that shut it down, and so it was a problem both for navigation, for commerce to continue to flow, and highlighted the fact that we have critical economic utility type infrastructure that is at risk. So that was the point I was trying to make, but I do, think those are, your points are well
I
taken.
will say you did make a point. I agree. Thank you.
I would add, Sean, echo Chip's comments. So we do have some beneficial use funding in our annual plan. We have that in each annual plan. So we do partner with the Corps to enable that beneficial use to happen. I think you raised a really good point, though, a unique point as it relates to the anchorages, which as we know, nobody owns, nobody maintains. And I think us as a coastal program, kind of from the beneficial use angle with navigation, obviously in a national economic and transportation angle working together to try to find a solution to that is a good approach. And I think we've had some kind of cursory discussions related to that, but that's something that I think that we need to certainly consider pursuing. I know we've been trying to schedule our regular meeting. It's been pushed back, but I think that'd be a great topic for us to discuss with DOT at our next meeting and how we can try to crack that down.
Appreciate that. We'll be there.
Can you, I know this is not exactly on the master plan, but we are working with Plaquemines Parish on a BU project that was recently.
Yes,
I just put that on the record for Sean, I don't know if that's an area that.
Yeah, so there's the Tiger Pass dredging that's occurring just south, I guess, or outside of Venice.
Tiger Pass isn't going to be dredged until we can identify pipelines, and that has been a really kind of interesting development. There have been multiple efforts to locate pipelines. They know they're there, but they can't tell how deep they are. That was a discussion on the call this morning. The Corps is looking at, again, trying to locate them. Some of the best survey companies have tried, and there are things like biological masses and things that cause, they've just been unable to identify them. So we can't dredge Tiger Pass until we identify how deep those pipelines are buried below hard sand. And that there's similar challenges on the Mississippi River, keeping above Mile 175, related to that very, and I've heard from a lot of surveyors who say they can do it. Anybody that can, the Corps of Engineers is happy to review and look, because that is a real pressing need for multiple reasons.
Got it. Thank you. Any other comments or questions for me? Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Brent. So, Russell, are you going to do HB 99 and the other coastal bills? There you are. Thank you.
Just going to cover some of the coastal bills real quick, and then the last one standing up as we kind of adjourn here and wrap it up. So, just real quick, the legislative session starts on Monday, April 10th, and adjourns Thursday, June 8th. Short session, fiscal session, so legislators are limited to 5 general nature bills. There's quite a few tax and revenue bills filed, but of the 830 pieces of legislation that have been filed thus far, coastal is tracking just about 80. The coastal priorities for the 2023 session include, of course, certainly the 2023 master plan and the FY24 annual plan. Both of those will be filed, carried by Senator Henskins and Representative Zerang. We'll start in the Senate this year, hopefully scheduled for the day after the board meeting. So shortly after the board meeting on the 19th, the annual plan and master plan will be submitted to the legislature, and then the very next day, Thursday, hopefully we'll be in Senate Natural Resources hearing those two.
And both of those plans will move concurrently, right, at the same time. So when we're in Senate Natural Resources, we'll be hearing both master plan and annual plan. Senate Transportation, both master plan and annual plan, and I'm hopeful that the full chambers will vote on annual plan and master plan the same day. Two different legislative vehicles, separate resolutions, but they will be heard at the same time.
And then the other bill or the two other bills that I want to discuss, specifically kind of in the coastal package is House Bill 99 by Representative Ogeron. That is the constitutional amendment to dedicate offshore alternative energy revenues to the Coastal Trust Fund. It's a refile of House Bill 636 last year. That bill would treat federal revenues derived from alternative energy sources like offshore wind to the Coastal Trust Fund, much like Go Mesa currently is handled. House Bill 116 is the accompanying statutory language change for the constitutional amendment, but it also, House Bill 116 also, only by statutory dedication, dedicates any alternative energy revenues received by the state on state land and or state water bottoms, specifically in the coastal area, to the Coastal Trust Fund. So I know there's quite a few checks there, but any revenues derived on state land and state water bottoms in the specific coastal area would be dedicated to the Coastal Trust Fund by House Bill 116. Z also has filed House Bill 592. That's the legislation that would formalize and establish the state's chief resilience officer in statute. So that's another bill that we're working on. Of course, you all heard mention the $157 million in surplus that for coastal projects for CPRA that the governor has lined out in his budget. We will certainly be working on that. I'm happy to give you all any information on the projects and the list. All that will be contained in the master plan whenever it's released. But I'm certainly working with folks to share that information as well. Outside of that, a whole bunch of other bills, carbon capture, tax revenue related bills. There's kind of the gamut for what's been introduced. But I'm happy to take any questions if y'all have any questions. All right.
Thanks, Chris.
Try to be as fast as possible.
So, unfortunately, we don't have a quorum of members to be able to pass the resolution in support of the master plan. We have a very large commission here. Well, I know a lot of families are out of town this week, but what we would like to do is we can express our support, and we can also show up at the legislature and put in a green card for the annual plan and the master plan. So I know we have one member of the public that is here. Well, first of all, does anyone want to discuss that? I know we got a comment with a public comment who came, I think, to speak on their working review resolution, or just public comment in general. Would anybody on the commission like to say anything before we ask for, I guess, public comment on the master plan?
I want to say something about master plan approval process. So forgive me for being overly frank here, but in years past, members, when we were in a legislative committee, you know who shows up more so than anybody? Environmental groups.
Where are you going with this, buddy?
Which is good.
Okay.
Which is good. But we need more than just environmental groups showing up in these legislative committees. So we need parish representation. We need nonprofits. We need ports. We need navigation. You name it. Any stakeholder group that is impacted or affected by coastal restoration should have their behind in these committee hearings. Landowners. Again, in order for this to become a larger priority for the state, in order for us to get more attention on the upcoming fiscal cliff, we need more than just environmental groups sitting beside us in these hearings. So I would just strongly encourage all of you. Russell, as he said, the plan will be presented to the CPRA board on April the 19th. And we hope to be in a committee hearing on the 20th. So I've had conversations with President Cortez and Speaker Schexnayder that I want to move these plans as soon as we possibly can. Because if you watch session, you know that these, if you're able to agree with me here, that toward the end is where we really get bogged down in these real intense political discussions. So I would really like to get the annual plan and master plan done as soon as we possibly can, and would just really appreciate a broader representation of co-seats, as I like to call everybody, in committee.
Okay. Thank you, Chip. Any comments from members of the commission? Any other comments?
Hey, you let me know when those committees are represented. Only do it.
Mark?
One last thing, because I think it goes to the kind of things we should be, informing ourselves about and helping to inform anybody who listens to us. I know that we've gone through a lot here about funding, and I thought it was a very good presentation, it should be shared more widely. But I don't think there's a general recognition of how some of those dollars can be spent. I think a good example is how many of these dollars are, reprogrammable. I mean, I'm not in favor ever of doing a project just because you have money. Or doing even the right project in the wrong way because you have money to do it. But if you don't like a project as it's been designed, it doesn't mean that you can take those dollars and reprogram it to something else. Because certainly that comes up on mid-bear territory. Some of the dollars that are committed to mid-bear territory are not, swappable. We're just any other project. And I don't think that's well understood. And even if we need to revisit that at some point, which we can't do alone by any means, then we need to make sure that we're thinking not just about the project, but the people we're working with to provide those funds. So I think there is a tendency to think that it's just come up with an alternative project and we can do something different. You probably can't. Your choice may be to do a project or not do a project, at least in the near term. So I think that is something we all need to do a better job of explaining. I don't think that's well understood.
Any other comments by commissioners? Well, I guess since we don't have a resolution, we can just move straight into public comment. And I know George.
Good morning, whatever it is, somebody watching the clock. My name is George Bowers. I'm a lifelong commercial fisherman. Initially, before the CPRA was started, it was another board, I was the name of it, I was one of the initial voting members. Unfortunately, that changed. We took the voting rights away from the commercial fishermen. Eventually, they stuck us on the bio capacity only. Eventually, you can come and comment. That was sad. Fortunately, Chip and I, as life goes around, have mutual friends. They asked me to give them a change. Well, basically, I have to get up here all the time because they come exercise this utility. For me to drive all the way up here from St. Bernard or Baton Rouge and come here and testify, and bring up information. And I know when I walk out there, the door goes about 13, it's become frustrating for all of us to do that. And today, as I'm watching the presentation, I got like 4 different items I want to discuss. In reference to these subcommittees, I like the idea that was smaller people could talk. I want to raise my hand because I want to volunteer, but I think that's against the rules. That's how to do it. Okay. If you don't put somebody like us on these committees, we don't have to understand where we came from and where we're at and where we're going, or eventually go out of business. It'll be the same thing that happened on a CPRA or CPRA board. It's back to file 13. So is this going to be a change committee, a change system? And if you don't take my 57 years of water and take that information and put it somewhere, what good is it? I don't know how long I'm going to be here. You people are killing me. I only have one on the last day night. I'm still fighting. The next thing I saw on the slide, money was allocated to provide and enhance recreational opportunities. I kept looking for the next slide. Money is allocated to enhance commercial opportunities. But is it because y'all aware that there's gonna be irreparable harm to the commercial fishing industry? Our dying in these two areas are gonna be a foregone conclusion. And I'm telling you this, as Jim, I've been testifying in 20 years. You know, that's why we kept asking, let's pump. That's a little different, as Mark alluded to. Okay, and then the third thing I found very offensive, adapt to new realities. I find these words particularly disturbing. How do you adapt to cancer? That's what it's going to be. We put these large-scale freshwater diversions in my area, St. Bernard, as well as Baton, it's going to be like a cancer. It's going to eat it up and kill it. You know. So I said, well, you know, it's just going to displace you. I said, you can't displace the questions. Questions only grow in a certain place, and then that you just can't do it. You know. So what's going to happen is we're going to fight and fight and fight till we die, but we're not even going to invest. You understand? We just going to go away. I just, you know, I've testified. I've represented the industry from here all the way to Europe. In Europe, once or twice, trying to represent the industry in films and stuff like that for BP Spill. You know, and for it to just let it die. And my wife says, you know, you've been doing this for 35 years. Uncompensated, cost you a fortune, cost us a fortune. She said, why do you keep doing it? I said, because my mom and dad come from the old country, we call ass and face for nothing. And they made a life for us. And my daddy challenged me, he said, you know, you're kind of unique. You went to college, but you also went back on the boat. He said, look, use what you know to save what you want to save for us. And that's what I've been doing, so that's why I'm here today. Mr. Haas, I'm saying it right? You mentioned overwhelming support for your plan. How many real commercial fishermen and oyster farmers in the outfall area signed a letter of support? I guarantee you not one. You know, so this is the game that was played. A lot of y'all were not around back then. The first set of public hearings, the first day you're going to have public hearings. We're talking 20 years ago now, 17, 18, 20 years ago. So every public hearing in the coastal areas, 97.7% said, hit the road, Jack, this is going to kill us. So they kept going further north, further north, further north in the state. They started saying questions like, well, do you believe in coastal restoration? I said, well, I answered, yes, too. But, you know, the way you went through coastal restoration, you know, so eventually, and Gary Graves is what I was doing. Don't get me wrong, Gary and I, we worked together on a lot of things. This is one we do not work together on. I said, Gary, this is counterfeit. You're reaching out to people, not necessarily sure what's going on, and they're going to show support. And that's what ended up happening. Even though every coastal parish, every parish that would be negatively impacted, voted 97% against it, it's still bad. And it's still developed where, okay, you a commercial fisherman, we're going to do this. There's so much money involved in here. We're going to do this, and hey, if you make it, fine. If you don't, too bad, it's so sad, dinosaurs died. There's another reason why we shouldn't be considered dinosaurs. And I don't want to be a museum piece. I mean, I'll make it, you know, I'll probably be able to take tours out. I'll probably catch enough shrimp until I die. That's not what this state needs. And Mr. Garofalo, this state cannot financially survive without the commercial and recreational industry. We cannot. Because it's hard to do. Okay, the main reason I'm here, the last comment, is that over the last 2 decades, I've asked one question. This is the first point of order. What is going to be my compensation, our compensation, when you're wrong? And King Billy was the one that said, sir, I support you. We'll put some money up for that. I said, okay, how much are you going to put up? He put up some minimum amount. I said, King, I won't touch it. I don't want to touch the loss we're going to have. I said, brother, just take some of that money, put it on the side. And if I'm wrong and you're right, these diversions do not destroy me, well, let's build another one. Okay? But that's not going to be the case. So once again, 20 years down the line, compensation. That's your compensation, your definition of compensation and my definition of compensation is two different worlds, you know? So we keep asking, what's compensation? Is it monetarily, or is it, okay, I'm gonna take your background that's only, what's the background, it's only good right there where it's at, and move it out the door. That's compensation. Well, that is compensation, useless.
George, these are a lot of issues, and I appreciate, I think I was around the 20-plus years. I think I met you in maybe 89 or a little after, and you were voice. I think you should, are you interested in joining the fisheries committee?
It's possible, because right now, I get killed all my and this country, while so many wants to come in, I can't do it. So I got time, that's what I mean.
Okay, good, and I hear congratulations are in order for your family.
Yeah, definitely. My daughter got engaged, my son got married, so I can tell you, y'all better hurry up and have a kid or something, from a football from a wheelchair.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, that's it.
Okay, thank you, George. Are there any other members of the public who would like to comment, Tyler?
Yeah, real quick, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Tyler Bosworth, Advocacy Director for Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. Just a quick plug for our State and Coast Conference. It's back in person, the meeting's together again. It'll be May 31st or June 2nd. We had a tremendous response to our call for proposals, and the program's going to be great. Those who made responses, made proposals, received responses last week. We'll finalize that and have the full program out by the end of the month. And then one tidbit that I'm going to drop to kind of entice folks to purchase tickets if you plan on coming. I'm happy to announce that we are going to cap State of the Coast Conference with a candidate forum for coastal issues for the gubernatorial race in 2024. So we're excited to add that to the program. We've got a slate of great speakers that will join us. Mike Tidwell from Mike Farewell, and a bunch of other folks. So like I said, together again, and we're going to see you there.
Great, thank you. Any questions about state of the coast? All right. Any other members of the public that would like to speak? Well, if not, I welcome a motion to adjourn.